Welcome back to our next lecture over respiration and fermentation. So this lecture I'm going to kind of do a little different than our normal lectures. I'm going to kind of give a very brief overview on this one and then mostly rely on the supplemental videos. It's much easier to watch someone else explain it in person versus, and also you get some alternative explanations and things. There are lots of great videos of this on YouTube to check out. You can watch the chemicals move around versus a very static PowerPoint and me just doing this with my mouse. So a very brief overview on this one, and then check out the supplemental video tab. You can see the YouTube videos that I've chosen for you guys. There are countless others out there that are really good. So if you need some alternative explanation, just let me know and I'll find you some more. So let's go ahead and get started on this one. So everything on the planet, as you've probably figured out, needs food and oxygen. So food is going to be required to make energy, which we've talked about, what energy is useful for and what, to do work and things like that. And oxygen is going to be needed to make that energy. So in the electron transport chain, oxygen is going to be stripping away our electrons, and that's why we need that to breathe out CO2. So you'll see about that in the little supplemental videos. So the form of cellular energy is known as ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Here's the adenosine part, adenine. 1, 2, 3 phosphates, triphosphate right there. 1 adenine, 3 phosphates, adenosine triphosphate. And this is essentially what you get here. This is cellular gasoline. There's no other thing on the planet that can use ATP other than cells, and nothing else makes ATP other than cells. So cells take sugars and all kinds of other stuff that they eat, that we eat, and then they eat that from the inside of us, or they eat it from their environment if they're a single-celled organism, and then they break that sugar down and convert that sugar into ATP, which then they can use as gasoline. So this is the whole end game here of that cells are trying to produce. All the energy and stuff that they intake, they're going to convert into this ATP molecule to use for their energy source. So the bonds that hold this ATP molecule together are where the energy is stored. So 1 bond, 2 bonds, there's 2 bonds inside of here. You can break it twice, so you can break it into adenosine diphosphate with 2 phosphorus groups. Then you can break it one more time, and then you essentially just get a DNA molecule, a nucleotide essentially, over there when you break it again. But anyway, the little energy bond, the energy stored in between these bonds, when the bonds are broken, when a phosphate group is stripped away, that energy that's stored inside is going to be the energy that's used by the cell to do things. So that's where the energy comes from, the energy that's stored holding those 2 molecules, or those 2 phosphate groups together. So ATP is super important because, like I mentioned, it's how our cells do work. They can't take glucose and eat the glucose and do work with it. They have to convert that glucose into ATP, and that's the whole point. So glucose is the base product. We're going to use glucose to make the ATP, but glucose is not useful for food in itself. We have to get that ATP out, and this is essentially what cellular respiration does, what this entire chapter is useful for. Is going to cover. So ATP is useful for allowing your cells to move around, to contract, and your muscles to breathe, to power things inside of your body like chemical reactions. So super, super important to life. Obviously, it's the same as your car. You have to have gasoline for your car to work. So here's our chemical reaction for cellular respiration that takes place in oxygen, aerobic. Anaerobic takes place without oxygen. So you can see here ATP is going to be produced, as well as CO2 and water. If you're familiar with what we breathe, you breathe out the CO2 and a little water vapor, and the ATP stays inside of you. The glucose from what you eat is going to be consumed with the oxygen that you breathe to make those, and this is how this works. So this is the glucose, oxygen, CO2, water, and ATP. So air is super useful because we have to get to that oxygen, and that oxygen is going to be used to strip away electrons from the electron transport chain in the form of CO2 to get them away from a device so the electrons actually have somewhere to go. You'll see how the electrons power ATP synthase and things in just a little while. So this is essentially where I'm going to hand it over to the supplemental videos. I'll go over this super fast. These are the 3 steps of cellular respiration: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain. The YouTube videos will go into depth on what goes on inside of each one of these. It's not very easy to sit here and go, well, this turns into this, and this turns into this, and does that, and does this, and it goes around here in a little circle. When you can actually watch the things actually go around the little diagrams and visualizations in the YouTube video. So I'm going to rely on that. So these are the steps of cellular respiration in order. Let's go ahead and skip through this one. Cellular respiration takes place inside of the mitochondria of a cell, where glycolysis takes place in the cytosol. If you are a prokaryote, you obviously don't have organelles, so essentially all of that stuff is going to take place inside of the cytosol, except for the electron transport chain, which takes place on the cell membrane. So mitochondria is going to be producing the most ATP. Glycolysis produces a little bit. Most of the ATP is going to be produced inside of the mitochondria here. This is where the electron transport chain takes place. The electrons get pumped inside of here, and they fall through the little ATP synthase molecule in just a second, spin it around kind of like a boat motor, which forces the 2 phosphate groups, or 1 phosphate group, onto ADP, which makes ATP. So a very interesting little step that you'll get to see move around on the YouTube video. So glycolysis, glycolysis, splitting of sugar. Lysis means split, glyco means sugar, so splitting of sugar. So glycolysis is going to be split into pyruvate, which is a precursor, pyruvic acid, a precursor to making ATP. It's the first step of this. So you can see all the stuff here, all the electron transport steps, chains. Watch the electrons tumble down. You'll be able to see that in the YouTube video as well. Essentially, oxygen is going to steal the very last electrons. Once they're done, every time one of these electrons spins down, goes up and down like this around the cell membrane, it transfers energy. And essentially, once it's out of energy, the oxygen takes it away, and you breathe it out as CO2. There are other ways, you get 36 ATP from aerobic respiration. You get 2 from glycolysis and 34 from the electron transport chain. Now, this is a grand over-exaggeration. This is not realistic. In a perfect world, you get 36, but in reality, you probably get more like 20, maybe 25. It takes a lot of energy to do this. This is not a perfect process. So in an ideal world, you get this, but in a real world, you probably get more like 25 from producing the from the whole process of cellular respiration from 1 glucose molecule. Energy comes in different forms. Proteins and fats have to be broken down different ways. The things that hold them together, the bonds, the things that make them up, the energy available in each one of them is significantly different, and they have to be broken apart in different parts of the cell and different cellular processes and things to extract the energy from them. Now, there are other ways that cells can produce energy. Sometimes they run out of oxygen. Some organisms don't require oxygen, so when they don't need oxygen, they can still produce energy. It's kind of required to live. So in that case, instead of producing CO2, they tend to produce alcohol. We also can undergo this type of process called lactic acid fermentations when you're exercising vigorously and you don't have enough oxygen in your body. And your cells are going to either shut down and let you get eaten by the bear, or you're going to have to keep running and get away. And they keep running, your cells still have to have energy, so lactic acid fermentation is what they go to when they're out of oxygen. So lactic acid builds up inside of your cells. A lot of people hear that the lactic acid is what causes muscle aches after you work out. It's not actually true. It's microscopic tears inside of your muscles, which makes way more sense than lactic acid causing pain. So essentially, this is all that I've got for this PowerPoint, guys. Feel free to check out the supplemental activities and watch the actual reactions occur. Watch someone talk you through these. Watch these things occur in real time, and watch them move around. So if you have any questions about this one, please feel free to let me know. Other than that, have a great rest of your day.